Hello everyone, I'm Aurora CDVA, the VTuber that starts dedicated series, then goes on hiatus. Challenge tutorials are a peculiar breed of tutorials, because technically speaking they're a subtype of another type of tutorials, but since this is a descending series, I decided to dedicate a whole episode on this type since they are objectively superior to their origin. But what exactly is a challenge tutorial in the first place? For this video, I will analyze Titanfall's 2 challenge tutorial, both because this beloved game deserves some love, and because it's the only game with this type of tutorial that I currently own. As a teenager I also had Call of Duty Modern Warfare, which also had one that I particularly loved, but since then I either sold it or lost it, and I refused to search around Comic Cons and video game stores in the hopes they have a physical copy for the PS3 for 3 seconds of footage. And Arceus forbid I buy that sucker digitally. We start the game with the customary introductory cutscene cinematic to showcase all the cool stuff you can pull off in game, and then the game properly starts with the option to have the camera sticks reversed or normal, and then we start with an obligatory tutorial to cover the minimum of the movement and shooting commands. The game doesn't stop your progress to express what jump button is the jump. You dictate the flow of the action by either jumping through the tutorial or stopping to listen to the tutorial trainer, and after covering the base stuff, we can finally have access to the gauntlet, the challenge tutorial. This gauntlet is an obstacle course that you can clear in less than a minute, if you know how to press more than 2 buttons, and it features 15 targets to shoot at. You don't need to shoot at every single target in the way for you to complete the course, but every target you leave alive will add seconds to your final time. So the ideal course of action would be to find a path that both lets you go as fast as you want, and it covers on the way every single enemy on the way. On my first attempt, I managed to pull 1 minute to a second. To the second. I think this is way more impressive in speedrunning the gauntlet itself, but the game thinks otherwise, since based off of your performance, the game sets the base difficulty of the game, meaning that the game itself recognizes your ability in the challenge and lets you know that if you want to up the ante, you need to prove that you can handle it by getting better at the gauntlet itself, shaving off more and more time as you go. You can also change the difficulty manually, but this is a good way to let players know what they can handle. Now, my goal is to showcase the process of getting better at the tutorial, not mastering it. So without any guides or specialized videos in how to ace the gauntlet, I spent several attempts to try and shave off time little by little, getting my aim a little bit better at every attempt, and starting to try and use grenades where I knew I could get multiple targets in one explosion. And after many attempts where I fumbled many grenades, missed several jumps, and straight up humiliated myself, I managed to pull off a semi-decent run.
Personal best.
Good enough for a game to unlock the hard difficulty. But why does the game lock the difficulty option behind a challenge tutorial instead of a manual selection? Especially since that manual selection does exist and the game presents it later on. Because of 2 things. First, it lets the player improve to the core gameplay of the game, in order to organically achieve the skills required for the game and set difficulty that you want to try out, leaving the hardcore players to stare at their fastest achieved time and go, I can do better than that, in order to up the ante. Especially since the game lets you know what's the recommended difficulty. You have the freedom to change it manually, but why would you do that if you didn't prove it yourself? but this also installs the intended playstyle of the game to the players, letting them know how the game is recommended to be played. This isn't an aspect I talked in the previous episode of the World of Tutorials, because usually it's not a problem in the games I covered. Dark Souls 2 is a game that rewards slow and methodical play, incentivizing a varied equipment with a careful approach. You can try to play it fast and furious like Bloodborne, resulting in your ass being zapped silly, and you can try to play it with only one weapon. But then you have to deal with the shortcomings of said weapon in the situations it falls off of, like for example, a lack of range or being resisted by the boss in question. So if the player is either naturally guided towards the intended experience of the game, or tries to power through the game with their stubbornness, leaving a sense of bitterness because they tried to force the game to be played in a way it wasn't intended to, souring their own experience of the game. But while Dark Souls 2 was a game that preceded its own genre, meaning it didn't have many games to be compared to and to be confusedly be played to as, Titanfall 2 is a first-person shooter, a genre that has too many games in it, with the main game that usually defines it being Call of Duty, and since there's an expectation of how things are handled in the gameplay department, the game needs to let the player know how to approach the gameplay without the player automatically resorting to the classic COD playstyle. And that's because Titanfall 2 is a game that is inherently bad if you try to play it as a Call of Duty game. This is an experience that builds its levels around its mechanics of parkouring around the battleground and dancing through the bullets, using every single piece of your equipment, letting the more heavy and normal combat to be relegated to the Titan piloting. So the game needs to install to its players the point of its gameplay loop, without annoying them, to assure the message gets received and not ignored. And how did the game manage to do it? By making the tutorial a challenge for the player to conquer, incentivizing them to naturally get better at it and to internalize the intended experience of the game as they speed through the gauntlet time and time again to shave off more and more time. This is an incredible way to naturally guide the players into not only learning about your gameplay, but to also integrate the intended playstyle without trying to shove it down their throat. But we can't quite wrap the bow of this tutorial yet, because we need to address a point I have mentioned at the start. This isn't a proper type of tutorial, it's a subtype that comes from another tutorial entirely. Obligatory tutorials are some of the most common tutorials in the video game sphere, as they're the easiest to implement in the game design to ensure the player learns the commands of your game, or at least they're the easiest to implement because they require the least amount of work to design around. You don't need to account for the player's way to play and learn if you force them to do a checklist before they can go out and play. I will not go into detail here since this type of tutorial will have its dedicated episode. But the reason I'm mentioning it here, it's because challenge tutorials are a type of obligatory tutorials. Before you begin the proper game, you need to do the challenge at least once in the designated time. Once you're done, no one forces to do it more than once. But that doesn't mean you have the freedom to ignore it, or it being integrated in the game so well that you don't even notice it being there. It's there whenever you like it or not. So why did I separate the episodes of these tutorials if they're both obligatory? Simple enough, because the challenge tutorials offer something that the obligatory tutorials can't by design: a choice. Sure, you can do it only once and then go with your life, but you have the option to master it throughout multiple tries. There's nothing stopping you to go to the training course multiple times, trying to shave every single second you can at every single attempt and beat your time. More and more. There's a reason to try and perfect it. Obligatory tutorials instead usually are just a checklist of stuff they need to make you do to legally say that they have a tutorial in them so the players can possibly be confused. So there's nothing too perfect, there's nothing to enjoy here, they're a short list. You just need to get them done and move on with your life. But the challenge tutorials are so much more than that. They're an initial obligation, sure, but once you're done with the basic chores, the game extends an invite for you. Are you content with getting by, or do you want to go further? Thank you for watching. If you played this type of tutorials before, what's your best time in them? As for me, this is all. See you next time! If you like the show, please like, comment and subscribe. A little bit of support goes a long way.